The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, arguably the best fantasy book of the past decade, except now it's been a bit more than a year since I finally read The Way of Kings, which I had an amazing experience with, and around a year ago I finished Words of Radiance, and then quite recently, around 4 months ago, I finished Oathbringer. And today I kind of wanted to look back on The Way of Kings, a book I rated very, very highly, and discuss if I still think that this book stands up, because really, to become one of the greatest fantasy books I ever read, a book needs to have a legacy. So today I kind of wanted to discuss that. Now I know I still need to read Rhythm of War and some of the novellas, but my perception of this book has actually changed as time has gone by. And it's really, really interesting because when I read this book, I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. Now the only reason why I didn't end up giving this book 5 stars was due to its very slow start. Now if you have read this book, then you know the first 400 pages is basically just a very, very long build up. And I really enjoy getting to know Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar, and especially in this book, Kaladin is the main POV, the person we have the flashbacks of, and I'm just a sucker for an underdog. So even though the first 400 pages were very slow, I enjoyed it, and when it really gets going, it is just incredible. But yeah, when I finished this book, I gave it 4.5 stars, only due to the slow start. Now what is interesting is that since then, I read 2 more Stormlight Archive books, and I've also read some other cosmere novels by Brandon Sanderson, and my perception has actually become more positive, which I think is not something that happens that often. But I think just having read Words of Radiance, which in my opinion is an even better book, you kind of come to realize with these 2 books that they really emotionally impact you, and especially when it comes to epic character moments. I don't really think there's that many books out there that I've ever read that have as many epic and incredible moments as this one. Now there's so many things here that have stuck with me from The Way of Kings. Firstly, we have to discuss Kaladin, and also this review is totally spoiler free, but like the introduction to Kaladin and Bridge 4 and the Bridge Burners, everything is just incredible. And I think most people will probably pick up Stormlight after having read Mistborn, and while Mistborn is fantastic, you pick up this book here. And the reason why I think that so many people fall in love with this is because coming straight from Mistborn, which is still an epic fantasy but is quite focused, you come into Stormlight and the scale is just so vast, so incredible, but it's also so compelling. Like the characters are brilliant, the world building is so vivid and intricate, and the plot is just so captivating. Just to reiterate what point I'm trying to make here is that I think a lot of people, they come from Mistborn, and most readers will probably have had an incredible experience reading those 3 books, just I think they're mind blown and just loving it. And then obviously you ask the question, is there anything out there that it can be maybe close to as good as Mistborn was and can give me those same feelings? And I think a lot of readers then go to Stormlight Archive and the expectations are exceeded. They find that the Stormlight Archive is actually even better than Mistborn, which for a lot of readers is probably a shocking experience. Actually, The Way of Kings kind of benefits from having a lot of readers that have just finished Mistborn first, because The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance is even better in a lot of ways. But I also do have to talk briefly about Words of Radiance, because I actually think one of the reasons why I think this book is even better is because of The Way of Kings. Now, Sanderson does an amazing job in The Way of Kings to build a really good foundation. You get quite a good grasp of the world, you still have a lot of questions, but you had like a huge adrenaline rush from the ending of Way of Kings. But I think having read that book, you kind of do also appreciate that it's quite slow, you still have lots of questions, and you would only just dream and hope that Sanderson at that point would actually take The Way of Kings and take it up a notch. And that's where Words of Radiance comes in. And what I think is just mind-boggling with this book here is that everything that was good in The Way of Kings, which is an amazing book really, is just improved upon here. I think the characters are fleshed out even more. Shallan is an incredible character, and while The Way of Kings has so many great character moments, the moments in Words of Radiance, they will like fuse into your brain forever. This was like reading Endgame of the Avengers. Now, I'm not a huge Marvel fan, but I know a lot of Marvel fans, like they were absolutely hyped for Endgame because of that final act, you know? There's so many incredible character moments in the Endgame, and that was kind of my experience with Words of Radiance. And as I started my video, it's been around 18 months I think since I read this one, and around 1 year since I read this one, and now looking back, the fact that this book still stays with me, and the fact that I remember the characters so vividly and so many moments here, just really tells me that these 2 books here are gonna stay with me forever. They'll definitely have that legacy, that longevity, and I totally get why people love these books. They have accessible writing style, incredible characters, fantastic character moments, and the fact fact that it stays with you for so long. I mean, I have a lot of books on my shelves and I love and remember lots of them, but there are very, very few fantasy books that are able to stay this strongly with me for such a long time. And most fantasy books I actually become more critical of as time goes by, but that is not the case with The Way of Kings. But yeah, initially I gave it 4.5 stars, and yeah, this is still firmly a 5-star read for me. And yeah, in my mind they have both aged like fine wines. Now, I started this video by saying The Way of Kings is the best book in the past decade, except, and I do have a couple of things here that I think can damage its longevity. Firstly, now I haven't read Rhythm of War yet, but I have read Oathbringer, and while I thoroughly enjoyed it, in my mind it didn't come anywhere near how good these two books were. Now, from what I've heard from so many people, The Rhythm of War is the weakest book in the Stormlight Archive, and while it is not really fair, endings and conclusions have a huge impact on how people perceive a piece of literature or a work. Now, if Sanderson is not able to deliver a satisfactory conclusion to the Stormlight Archive, then, and I know it's not fair, but I think in a lot of people's minds, they are gonna be less willing to recommend Way of Kings. I think a big reason why so many people are willing to recommend at the moment is because we don't have the book 5 yet, and all the books that are out yet are either fantastic or they're pretty good. And I don't really think that that point is that far-fetched, if I'm being absolutely honest. Just think about Game of Thrones, the TV adaptation. Everyone talks about the first 4 or 5 seasons were incredible, and then season 6 and 7 were okay, and then the last season was absolutely horrendous. It was so bad that no one recommends going back and watching the first 4 seasons, even though they were fantastic according to most people. I really don't expect this to happen, but if book 5 is horrible, then whether it's fair or not, I think that could definitely damage this book's legacy. Now, the other point I kind of want to raise with this book, which although it has aged like a fine wine for me, having read some other Sanderson books since and constantly reading more and more fantasy books, I have now come to realize that I've become a bit more of a prose snob, or I've come to enjoy more beautiful writing style more and more. Now, I'm not saying that Sanderson is a bad writer. Definitely not. His ability to craft incredible scenes and world building are just top notch, but I've come to know more and more that when I read Sanderson's novels, they don't captivate me as much as like Robin Hobb or Ted Williams, especially two authors which they could write IKEA manuals and I would still love them. Now, my only worry is that as I read more and more books, and if I am able to live a long life, hopefully one day I'll read like 500, 600, 700 fantasy books, I wouldn't be surprised that when I look back at the Stormlight Archive, I'll be a bit like, yeah, it's incredible, but man, the writing style was probably lacking a bit. It was just a bit too simplistic. But even if that does happen one day to me, it will not take away the emotions and how captivated I was with this book the first time I read it. So those are the only two really things I could see actually taken away from the legacy of Way of Kings. Book 5 being one of the worst books ever, which I don't expect, or me personally just reading more and more books and maybe becoming a bit more picky when it comes to what kind of writing style I appreciate, and with Sanderson having quite an accessible writing style. I'm not sure if it will happen, but I could perceive myself becoming a bit more picky and critical with how he writes his fantasy books. But nonetheless, you should definitely pick up the Stormlight Archive. Even though Oathbringer wasn't my favorite, I still thoroughly loved it, and I can't wait to read Rhythm of War this year in preparation for book 5 of the Stormlight Archive, and I just hope so dearly that Sanderson is gonna absolutely nail that conclusion. So if you have read the Stormlight Archive, I would love to know if you think that Way of Kings still stands up years after you read it, or if you become a bit more critical about this book years after you finish it. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you want to know my full thoughts on Oathbringer, which I read 4 or 5 months ago, then you should definitely check out this video. Oh, you're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that if you want more and you want to support me, then I do have a Patreon. Now, if you didn't know, then I have a Viking book club where every single month we read one book together, and you can be the one that can put the book forward. Last month we read this book, and this month we're reading this book. And at the moment we are trialing having Zoom book club discussions after everyone has read the book. So also if you want to discuss a book with me and other like-minded people, then the Patreon is the way to go. Now, in addition to getting your name in my videos, joining the Viking book club, potentially getting art cards depending on what tier you are, I am also basically spending around 100% of my Patreon income to reinvest back into my channel. Since I launched my Patreon, I have had more than 30 videos professionally edited. And just to give an example, from September 2023 to March 2024, I have spent more than $1,500 US into video editing with the aim to consistently post high quality videos for you to enjoy. It is much appreciated.